Hello, I'm Emma. I'm 32 years old and I graduated from Harvard University. Now I work as editor at a well-known publishing house in New York City. My story began when I went back to my hometown Boston. It's a place where old history meets modern life. I went to visit my family, who come from a long line of aristocrats. Since that visit, my life has been turned upside down. For a long time before that, I thought my life was happy, but then I met David. After visiting my family, I got on the train back to New York. I was reading a book to pass the time when a man sat down next to me. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He greeted me softly, and I smiled back before returning to my book. A few minutes later, he broke the silence. "Excuse me, do you know how long it takes to get to New York?" I looked up and replied, "About 4 hours." He nodded and asked, "Do you take this train often?" "Yes," I said, "whenever I visit my family in Boston." "Oh, Boston is a beautiful city," he said. "I was just there for a medical conference. My name's David, by the way, David Barnes." "Nice to meet you, David. I'm Emma Bright," I said, feeling a little more at ease. "Emma Bright?" he asked, his eyes lighting up. "I think I've heard of your family. They've been in Boston for generations, right?" I smiled, surprised. "Yes, that's right. My family has lived here for a long time." He leaned back in his seat, looking out the window for a moment. "The view from this train is amazing, don't you think?" I followed his gaze. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the passing trees. "It is beautiful," I agreed, feeling a calmness wash over me. "But I usually prefer to read during the ride. It helps the time pass." He looked a little embarrassed and said, "Sorry if I interrupted your reading." I gazed into his eyes for a moment, the soft light from the sunset reflecting in them. "Don't apologize," I said, my voice a little softer now. "Talking to someone like you seems much more enjoyable." As soon as the words left my lips, I felt my heart race. I wasn't sure if it was because of what I had said or because of his deep gaze that held mine. And for a second the world outside the train seemed to disappear. Either way, there was something about this moment that felt different. Something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in a long time. As we continued talking, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We started with casual topics about the weather, favorite books, and the places we've traveled. But soon we found ourselves sharing more personal stories. I told David about my life in New York, my work, and some of the challenges I faced balancing everything. In turn, David opened up about his own life. His warmth and honesty made it easy for me to talk to him, as if we had known each other for much longer than just a few hours on a train. There was a natural connection, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Time passed quickly, and I barely noticed the change in scenery outside the window. I glanced at my watch, surprised at how fast the hours had gone by. It felt like we had only just begun talking, yet the train was already starting to slow down. The overhead announcement confirmed we were approaching New York. I looked at David in surprise, and he smiled back at me with the same disbelief. "I can't believe we're here already," I said, shaking my head. "I know," he replied with a soft laugh. "It feels like time just disappeared." When the train arrived at the station, David and I walked together, chatting lightly until I saw my husband waiting for me on the platform. Earlier in our conversation, I had told David about my husband and daughter and how traditional our marriage was. My husband, Jonathan Wilson, is a well-known American politician, and my daughter, Lily, is my little angel, the one I love more than anything in the world. As we approached, I introduced my husband to David. They shook hands, exchanging polite greetings. At that moment, Jonathan's ears looked unusually big. How had I not noticed them before? We said goodbye to David and walked toward the car. As we moved away, Jonathan glanced at me and asked, "How did you meet him?" "Oh, we just met on the train," I replied casually, shrugging. Jonathan gave a small nod, though something in his eyes made me wonder if he noticed the subtle shift in me that even I was just beginning to understand. Silence fell between us as we drove back home. A strange intoxication washed over me, as if I had been drinking, but it wasn't from wine. It was something deeper, something that had awakened inside me. By the time I found myself in my room in the quiet embrace of my bed, my head was spinning with thoughts and emotions I hadn't felt in years. My heart pounded with a kind of ecstasy that left me breathless. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm within me, but every time I did, I saw David's face. His kind smile, his warm eyes, the way he had looked at me like he truly saw me, not as Emma Bright, the politician's wife, but as Emma, the woman. It was intoxicating. I woke up to the gentle touch of Jonathan's hand on my shoulder, his voice soft but insistent. "I missed you these past few days," he said, his breath warm against my ear. I stirred slightly, feeling his fingers trace a line down my arm. My body tensed. I had always been comfortable in Jonathan's touch, but tonight it felt different, like my mind was elsewhere, like I was torn between two worlds. "I missed you too," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I tried to avoid his touch, but he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me closer. "Emma," he murmured, his lips brushing against my neck, "you've been distant lately." I couldn't deny it. Something inside me had shifted. I wanted to tell him, to explain, but the words caught in my throat. How could I tell him that the woman he thought he knew so well had started to feel like a stranger even to herself? Instead, I let myself melt into his embrace, my body yielding to the familiarity of his warmth, even though my mind wandered elsewhere. I closed my eyes, trying to forget everything. Jonathan's hand moved gently across my back, and for a moment I wondered if things could ever go back to how they were. But deep down, I knew something had changed, something that I couldn't stop feeling it. Days passed, and the memory of David lingered in the back of my mind like an unfinished melody. He hadn't reached out, and part of me was relieved, thinking that maybe he'd disappear from my life as quickly as he'd entered it. But deep down, I longed to hear from him, even though I fought against that desire with every ounce of my will. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from David. My heart raced as I read it. "Hi, Emma. I haven't stopped thinking about our conversation. I'd love to see you again. Maybe coffee sometime?" I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen, torn between what I knew was right and what I felt. I typed a polite reply. "Hi, David. It was nice talking to you too, but I think it's best we don't meet again. I hope you understand." I hit send, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. It was the right thing to do. I had a family, a husband, a life. But as the days went on, David didn't give up. He sent me another message, this time asking about a book we had discussed on the train. The conversation was harmless, but it reignited something inside me. I tried to resist, but with each exchange, I found myself drawn to him more and more. There was a simplicity to our conversations, a kind of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. I felt like I could be myself around him, and it scared me how much I craved that feeling. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside a small cafe, the kind you'd walk by without a second glance. David was already inside, waiting for me at a corner table. My heart raced as I walked in, knowing that this was a step I couldn't take back. Our eyes met, and for a moment the world outside seemed to fade away. He stood up, offering me a warm smile, and I felt my resolve weaken. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as it had on the train. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Our secret meetings became more frequent after that. We met in quiet places, away from prying eyes, where we could be ourselves without the weight of the world on our shoulders. Each time I told myself it would be the last. Each time I failed to keep that promise. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the park, David took my hand in his. His touch was warm, comforting, and it sent a thrill through me that I couldn't ignore. "I know this is complicated," he said softly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Emma." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time I allowed myself to fully acknowledge what I had been trying so hard to deny. "I can't stop thinking about you either," I whispered. He leaned in closer, and I felt my breath hitch. My heart raced, the weight of our situation hanging between us. But in that moment, all I could think about was him, David. The man who had awakened something inside me that I thought was long gone. And as our lips met in a soft, hesitant kiss, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Though Jonathan was often consumed by his work, he started noticing the changes in me. There were moments when his gaze lingered a little too long, his eyes filled with questions he didn't ask outright. Then one evening after dinner, he finally spoke. "Emma," he said, his voice measured, trying to keep calm, "I can't help but feel like something is different. You're not the same. We have a family, a daughter, we have a life that we've built together." I looked away, my heart pounding, trying to gather the strength to deny everything. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jonathan. I'm just tired, that's all. Work has been overwhelming lately." He shook his head, frustration breaking through his composed exterior. "It's not just that. You've been distant, Emma. I'm not blind. People are starting to talk." At the mention of people, my chest tightened. I knew what he meant. Our circle of friends, the political elite, those who scrutinized every move we made. Rumors were beginning to spread, whispers of my connection with David. Jonathan leaned forward, lowering his voice as if trying to reason with me. "You know what's at stake here. I've worked so hard to get to where I am. Our reputation matters, Emma. My career, our future is on the line. We can't afford for these rumors to grow." I tried to defend myself, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jonathan, nothing has happened. I'm still your wife, Lily's mother." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of my lies crushing me. The truth was, I had become entangled in something I couldn't escape. The more time I spent with David, the harder it became to resist him. Our secret meetings had become more frequent, and I had started visiting him at his apartment, where we could be alone, away from prying eyes. In those moments with David, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, but at the same time, I was pulled in two directions, torn between my love for my daughter and the pressures from Jonathan, whose political career was now overshadowed by whispers of my affair. Emma, Jonathan said, his tone more pleading now. I'm willing to forgive this, whatever it is, but you have to stop. I don't want to lose everything we've worked for. Do you really want to destroy our family, our daughter? If this gets out any further, it could ruin my career. You know I can't afford a scandal. He paused, his eyes searching mine, trying to find some semblance of the woman he had once known. I love you, Emma, but if you don't stop, if this continues, I'll have no choice but to take Lily. I'll make sure you never see her again. My heart sank at the threat. The thought of losing my daughter was unbearable, but at the same time I couldn't deny the feelings that had developed for David. They were consuming me, blurring the lines between what was right and what I desired. I felt like I was living two lives, one as Jonathan's dutiful wife, the other as David's lover. I couldn't keep up the facade much longer, and Jonathan's ultimatum left me teetering on the edge of an impossible decision. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I choose between my daughter and the love that was rekindling something inside me that I thought had died long ago? The silence between us stretched painfully, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Jonathan's voice broke through the tension, cold and sharp. This is your last chance, Emma. Think about what you're willing to sacrifice. I felt torn apart inside, unable to make a decision. The weight of it all was too much to bear alone, and the only person I could think of to share it with was David. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of the storm inside me. The next evening I went to his apartment, my heart heavy with the burden of Jonathan's ultimatum. David welcomed me in with his usual warmth, but as soon as he saw the look on my face, he knew something was wrong. What is it, Emma? He asked, concern etched into his features as he guided me to sit down. I took a deep breath, gathering the courage to tell him everything. I told Jonathan about us, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Well, not directly, but he knows. He's threatened to take Lily away from me if I don't stop seeing you. David sat quietly, listening intently as I poured out my heart. I told him about Jonathan's warnings, his anger, and how much my daughter meant to me. How torn I felt between the life I had built and the feelings I couldn't control. When I finally finished, there was a long pause. David ran a hand through his hair, his expression conflicted. Emma, he said softly, breaking the silence, I love you. You know that. But I can't bear the thought of you losing your daughter because of me. I looked up at him, my eyes searching his, but he continued, his voice filled with sorrow. I can't take that away from you, Emma. No matter how much I want to be with you, I could never live with the guilt of knowing that I was the reason you lost Lily. I can't replace her, no matter how much I love you. She's your daughter, your world. His words hit me like a wave. and for a moment I felt like the ground was slipping from beneath me. I didn't know what to say. David was right. No one could replace my daughter. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the love I felt for him. It was tearing me apart. He reached out and took my hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Emma," he said, his voice steady, "the decision is yours to make. I won't push you and I won't make promises I can't keep. But I need you to know that I love you, and whatever you choose, I will always care about you. But I can't be the reason you lose everything." I felt my heart ache as I looked into his eyes, seeing the pain reflected in them. He was telling me the truth, the hard truth that I didn't want to face. No matter how much we wanted to be together, the consequences were too great. Tears welled up in my eyes as I whispered, "I don't know what to do, David." He pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around me in a comforting embrace. "I wish I could make this easier for you," he said, his voice soft in my ear. "But I can't. All I can do is be honest with you. I love you, but I can't ask you to give up your daughter, your life, for me." I rested my head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. In that moment, I realized how impossible this situation had become. No matter what choice I made, someone would get hurt. Jonathan, Lily, David, or even myself. David held me for a long time, neither of us saying a word, just holding on to the fragile connection between us, knowing that soon I would have to make the most difficult decision of my life.